Good evening. I'm Al Simpson, the director of the Institute of Politics. And tonight we will discuss probably one of the most divisive issues in, I think, American history, perhaps without being too dramatic, even since slavery. In all my years of public service, including 18 years in the U.S. Senate and 13 years serving in the Wyoming State Legislature, no issue ever caused me or any other legislator greater personal pain or angst or anguish. It is so terribly difficult to rationally discuss that in the 20-year history of this forum, we have never held an event on this topic. And I can assure you many of us had rather serious reservations about whether we should hold tonight's discussion. But the students of Harvard came to us, told us they wanted to have a civil discussion on this issue, that they believed it was important for students to engage in this debate, especially for students, to engage in this debate, and that the vast majority of students are personally struggling, morally and academically grappling with where they are or where they might find themselves on this issue. And at the Institute of Politics, we are all about the students. Our mission is to inspire and to encourage young people to enter careers in government, politics, and public service. And we try to take our marching orders from our students. And before I introduce tonight's guest, I want to share something else about the students of Harvard. It was the Institute of Politics Student Advisory Committee, the Harvard Right to Life group, and the Harvard Students for Choice organization that made this event possible. They had joint meetings together, and together they planned tonight's event. They decided which speakers to invite. They reached out to the 14 other student organizations who are co-sponsoring tonight's event. Lastly, they jointly drafted the History of Abortion flyer, which you have, and they then jointly drafted an absolutely remarkable op-ed piece in today's Harvard Crimson. It was entitled, "Looking to Agree on Abortion," and both pieces are the only items that have been handed out tonight. It gives us some earnest hope that perhaps one day we can find common ground on abortion. And tonight we are here about listening and learning and respecting others' views, since it is the essence of democracy. And tonight we're here about civility and not attack politics. Tonight we're here trying to see or find a common ground. Tonight we are here to raise consciousness and not to raise hell. And after my introduction, which were prepared for me by the students, we'll open the questions and answer session, which will begin with the students, and recognizing them here on this floor. First panelist, and I'm proceeding alphabetically, is Bill Baird, National Director of the Pro-Choice League, and a pioneer in the reproductive rights movement for more than 30 years. It's been called the, as I say, the students prepared these introductions. Just remember that. He's been a pioneer in the reproductive rights movement for more than 30 years. He's been called the father of the sexual revolution for his work in legalizing birth control for unmarried citizens. He has been involved in 3 U.S. Supreme Court decisions for reproductive rights, including Baird versus Eisenstadt, which set the legal precedent for Roe versus Wade. He has spoken at Harvard previously several times. He is committed to all forms of family planning and the constitutional right to abortion. Gloria Felt is the president of Planned Parenthood Federation of America. She is also president of the Planned Parenthood Action Fund, as well as the founder of Planned Parenthood's Political Action Committee. She has spearheaded the Responsible Choices Action Agenda, federal and state legislative campaign with 3 goals: to increase services that prevent unwanted pregnancy, to improve the quality of reproductive health care and to ensure access to safe legal abortion. Ms. Felt assumed leadership of Planned Parenthood in 1996, 80 years after Margaret Sanger opened the first U.S. birth control clinic in Brooklyn, New York. Vanity Fair recently named Ms. Felt one of America's top 200 women leaders, legend, and trailblazers. Sharon Foster is the president of Feminists for Life of America. She and her organization work towards systematically eliminating the root causes that drive women to abortion by facilitating practical alternatives to termination of pregnancy. Some of Ms. Foster's projects have included working with American female college students and Irish women, and to inform them of alternatives to abortion and resources that would enable them to bring their pregnancies to term. Ms. Foster's work has been part of a lifelong commitment to enhancing health care. Before she began her work with Feminists for Life, she worked to help the mentally ill and those suffering from no-fault brain disease. Dr. Bernard Nathanson is an associate professor of OBGYN at the New York Medical College. Dr. Nathanson was one of the original leaders of the American pro-choice movement and co-founder of NARAL, which is the National Abortion Rights Action League. He himself was a practitioner of abortion, but had a complete change of position and is now the leader in the pro-life movement. In this capacity, he is also well known for the creation of the short film Silent Scream, a graphic description of abortion. Dr. Nathanson is also the author of The Hand of God and holds a unique position in the abortion activist community. With that, I'm going to take the moderator's privilege and ask the first question. After that, we will go to the audience. If we can please have the questions asked in 1 minute, the responses will be given in 2 minutes. And we'll try that. So questions from the audience will be, if you can express them, and we know you will, in 1 minute. And the responses in 2 minutes. Let me ask you all this, each of you, and each of you please take 5 minutes. When you were a student, wherever that might have been, and whatever age, at the approximate age, say at the age of our audience of students here tonight, I would conjecture that none of you planned to make a career relating to abortion. And I would ask each of you to share with us in this 5-minute response how you became involved in the abortion issue. And we'll begin here with in alphabetical order, please.
Well, first I want to tell you I'm thrilled to be here. But before I answer your question formally, it's my anniversary tonight. 30 years ago tonight, I was in prison at the Charles Street Jail. My crime was delivering a speech to 2,500 students at Boston University to challenge a law that was called Crimes Against Chastity, Morality, Decency, and Good Order. And that law said to you young people that you could not look at a birth control device, you could not receive a birth control device, whether it be married or single. And I thought the law was insane. Students at Boston University asked me to challenge the law. And I stood before that number of people, and I held up a diaphragm, and I explained how it worked. I also gave 1 condom and 1 package of foam to a 19-year-old student. And why a 19-year-old student? A 19-year-old was a minor in those days, if you're under 21. And I wanted to challenge the law. Do minors, do single women have the same right of privacy as married women? Lo and behold, the court found me guilty of indecent exposure of obscene objects. And I was sentenced to prison for 3 months. So tonight is my anniversary. However, that anniversary came at a price that brought me back to your original question. I grew up in the slums of Brooklyn. I was one of 6 children, and money and I never go together, even to this day. At this stage, I was working my way through Brooklyn College as a pre-medical student with the hopes of becoming a physician someday. Eventually, by the way, I did make medical school, Bernie, and I was president of my class in medical school, but ran out of money. When I ran out of money, I worked for a company called EMCO, which made a birth control product. And I coordinated research for them. And at Harlem Hospital, I heard a woman scream. And I ran into the hallway, and I saw a woman covered with blood with an 8-inch piece of coat hanger embedded in her uterus. In those days, I turned around to a Planned Parenthood, who in those days were not really fighting for abortion rights. There was no now, there was nobody. So I decided I would challenge the laws. And in New York State, 1965, my 30th anniversary coming up, I was put in prison for showing a diaphragm. Freehold, New Jersey, I was put in prison for 20 days the following year. So with that background in mind, I'm convinced that no one has a right to tell a woman that she's got to go through a pregnancy because someone else thinks it's wrong. So one of the common grounds I would challenge anyone in this room is, could we not agree to this? Two major fronts. Could we reduce the need for abortion by backing Baird v. Eisenstadt, the case that legalized birth control? And on this desk, your governor today has proclaimed March 22nd Right to Privacy Day in honor of my Supreme Court case. With the governor doing that, where he calls upon you, the people of the state, perhaps we can get people to agree that birth control should be legal, be more readily distributed. But also, can we get over the nonsense? Do young people have a right to intercourse? Can we stop these games that you're going to wear chastity rings, that people who are not married are going to become secondary virgins, as they're being called for? Can we accept that we are all sexual beings and that you have a right to knowledge of birth control and a right to abortion? The last point of common grounds, you notice there are police all over the place. I've been shot at twice. My clinic has been firebombed. Dr. Slepian was listed on the Internet Nuremberg hit list. I am on that list. And I'm also listed as wounded because the bullet did not hit me, but the glass did. There is a way that we can have a common ground of diffusing the hatred by recognizing that people like Bill Baird and Gloria, we are not devils, as we're called. We're not murderers. We're not butchers. We're a people completely devoted to the dignity and freedom of women. That if we could stop the hate speech that dehumanizes us, making it easier not to kill Bill Baird the man, but really to kill Bill Baird the devil. And that's how many people think of us, and we're not. We're people who are passionately in love with freedom, passionately in love with your rights. And to conclude, all I ask you is that maybe at the end of tonight, we can get the opposition to agree that birth control should be more readily available in this nation and better means of birth control directed to we men. Too often, women take the risk of the pill, the risk of abortion, the risk of childbirth, and we men tell you what to do. It's time that men take more of the responsibility as well.
Please.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for giving me this opportunity, because when I was about your age, I wasn't a student. I was married with 3 children. I had my first child when I was 16, and my third was born a few days after my 20th birthday. I had grown up in rural, small towns in Texas, where there was no notion that women had the kinds of options that you all have. I was not that unusual. This was in the 50s, and incidentally, the apex of teen pregnancy in this country was 1957, which was precisely when I became pregnant for the first time. I always like to be a trendsetter, I guess. So something happened to me after my third child was born. That was when I became a student, 4 months after he was born. I don't know, a sort of light bulb went off in my head, and I thought, oh my goodness, there are other things in this world that I should know about and should think about, and if I even want to just be a good mother to these children, I should further my education. And so I started to the community college in Odessa, Texas, where I then lived, and it took me, I think, about 14 years or 12 or 14 years to complete that, because I couldn't get to a senior level college until that time when one opened in my city. So had I thought at that time that I would be involved in this movement? Didn't even know about it, hadn't heard about it. But I did know a couple of things. The birth control pill came out about that same time. And I want to tell you, I popped those high hormone Navides like they were candy. Give me more, I will take them, whatever they are, because I knew that I loved my children, but if I had any more, I knew I couldn't really deal with it. That was number one. I then became very involved in various aspects of the civil rights movement, and suddenly it came to me that, wait a minute, women's rights were civil rights too, and the most basic civil right for a woman is to be able to control her own body, her own childbearing. At that time, I was teaching at Head Start, and my class happened to be in the parish hall of a Catholic church. That was where I taught it. And interestingly enough, the priest of that church was on the local Planned Parenthood board. Had no idea how radical he was. This was in the late 60s, before, as Bill mentioned, Planned Parenthood had really taken on the cause of legal abortion in a really high-profile way. But nevertheless, even as it pertained to birth control, that was a very radical thing for a priest to be doing. But he said to me, you know, the people in my parish are poor. How can I tell them they have to have a baby every year? I can't feed them for them. I can't clothe them. Who am I to tell them what they must do with their lives? Well, that made sense to me. I got involved with Planned Parenthood as a volunteer. Actually, my first board meeting that I attended, there was a screaming fight among the board members about whether they should be serving teens on their own consent. And this was West Texas, and after the fight was over and they had voted to allow girls who had had one pregnancy already, one, quote, illegitimate child, then they could get birth control. And the county judge was on the board, a very wise man, and he said, well, now if that ain't shutting the barn door after the cows done got out. I thought, what is this? What kind of organization is this? So I really got involved with Planned Parenthood because of family planning and birth control, and I really knew nothing about Roe v. Wade. I knew nothing about the movement to attain the right to choose abortion. But I just knew it made sense. I just knew from my own personal experience that I had made my own choices. And they weren't easy. It wasn't easy to have 3 children and still be a child myself. Who was I to make that judgment for any other woman? And I think that remains the source of my passion, my guiding force, until this very day, that feeling that this is such a personal and private matter, and who am I and who is anyone to try to tell another person what is the right choice?
Thank you. Sharon Foster, please.
Thank you. I want to thank you, Senator Simpson, for this opportunity, and the Institute for Politics, and Bill White and all the other staff who've organized this, from all of you who've come out tonight. You know, sometimes I think that people are apathetic about this issue, and then I come here. Well, it's appropriate that you asked about our college experience and how you came to understand this issue. When I was in college, when I was about to go to college, my father told me, you know, you could have a choice of any degree, you know, whatever major you want is fine. You know, at that time, that was pretty stunning, because you were allowed about 5 different choices at the time when you went to college. You know, you could go through 4 years of college and end up as a secretary. You could become a nurse, you could become a teacher, you could become a waitress or a flight attendant, sort of the same category. You could become a mom. And, you know, I'm not trying to make fun of any of these choices, but the only way you'd get promoted was if you became a nun, and then you could run an orphanage, a hospital, a college, or, you know, your own convent. I mean, it was bizarre to me that the only way you could get promoted was to become a Catholic nun. So I go off to college, and I'm sitting there going, well, the world is pretty limited. I was just told by my great aunt that, you had to learn 2 skills in life if you were a woman, either cooking or sewing. Guess which one I picked? My sister knows how to sew. So I'm in college at this time, and I am really excited because the Equal Rights Amendment is the thing that everybody is talking about. And I'm hearing about all these wonderful things you could do. And of course, there were trailblazers who were physicians or, who were in research or attorneys or whatever. But by and large, very few women had broken out into all these other wonderful professions. And your life was really going to college to get your MRS degree. So I'm thinking, this is really exciting. The Equal Rights Amendment is going to open up our world. And here I've got to change my mindset and think about other things that I'm going to become when I grow up, whenever that will be. And so I'm listening to all the talk about equality and nonviolence, and then there started the whispering of this concept called abortion. And I had believed that women should be able to control their own body, and I believed in the equality of women and their unborn child. So I didn't get this issue of abortion having anything to do with equality, and I certainly didn't understand how it had anything to do with the concept of nonviolence against women as well as against their unborn child. The feminist demands at that time about equal pay, equal hiring in the workplace, promotions, etc., all seems to be hinging on the right of us to control our fertility. And it was if we were all supposed to pass as men. And at that time, they started putting out girl suits versus boy suits with all the big bows in the front, And that's how you knew that this was a woman who was going to go into the workplace. So I started thinking that I thought feminism was about images of, really strong images of women who were capable of being fiercely protective of their children, as well as doing whatever they wanted in the world. And instead, it seemed that we were capitulating to employers and giving up on things like child support or child care. Were men going to take off work when their first child was born? Why couldn't women? Where was the maternity leave, the maternity benefits, the living wage for women, all these sort of things. But we were all supposed to accommodate the employer instead of saying, we're women, we have children, get over it. And so instead of thinking about equal rights for all, the concept started shifting, and we were basically forced to choose in the 70s between being pro-woman and pro-life, or pro-choice and pro-woman. And I just didn't buy it. I felt all alone. So I started thinking about the rhetoric that every child would be a wanted child, and I thought, well, what are you going to do with all the unwanted ones? Get rid of them? My father was one of those unwanted children who was raised in an orphanage and through foster care, and I thought about how precious he was and what a major contribution he'd made to my life and to others. And I believe that feminism was about the rights of all, not a matriarchy that took over from a patriarchy that said that women were now in charge, but that we would all have rights and that we would find solutions. This is what my mom taught me when we were little. We would find solutions that were nonviolent and respected every human being, no matter their size, their age, their location, their disability, or their parentage. And so I saw, what personally affected me most was seeing women being forced into both adoption and abortions. One of my girlfriends in high school was forced to walk down 2 miles of traffic in our area after she had been sent to an unwed mother's home. Her parents were mortified. She was a cheerleader, supposed to be great, perfect daughter, and she was forced to walk by herself for 2 miles home because she had embarrassed her family by becoming pregnant too soon. And then there were the forced abortion stories on my teenage girlfriends. In Washington, D.C., abortion was not illegal. And so I was sitting there thinking, this was all hideous. And then when I went to college, I was listening to girlfriends who would tell stories about boyfriends who would force them into an abortion because they said they would pay for an abortion, but they wouldn't give them a dime for child support. So, thank you. I'll wrap it up. The things that I learned when I was going through, all of my life in this was that women were still suffering, and I was committed to finding a better way, and I don't think we're there yet. I don't think abortion is acceptable for women. I don't think coercing them into adoptions is acceptable. I think we're still on a path, and we've still got to look for better solutions for women because we deserve it. Thank you.
Dr. Nathanson, please.
I had my first encounter with abortion when I was in medical school. I won't tell you how long ago that was. Suffice it to say that I remember when the Dead Sea was only sick. But this was a bungled abortion. My girlfriend almost died. And as I progressed along in my medical education, as a resident in obstetrics and gynecology, I found that half of our beds on wards, on gynecologic wards, were taken up by women who had been maimed or badly infected and virtually killed by illegal abortion. So I cultivated a ferocious dislike, an intense contempt for all laws restricting abortion. In 1968, I met Lawrence Lader, who had just published a book on abortion, the book demanded abortion on demand, on request, and he and I and several others formed a group called NARAL, National Abortion Rights Action League, which was then known as the National Association for Repeal of Abortion Laws. And he and I were the key strategists for striking down abortion laws in this country and even overseas, and we were enormously successful. By 1970, 2 years later, we had struck down a law restricting abortion in New York State, which had stood since 1828. But striking down the laws was not enough. We had to then provide for those women coming to us from the eastern half of the United States, because New York was the only state that had a reasonable abortion law. And so to that end, I started a clinic in New York City called the Center for Reproductive and Sexual Health. Acronym was CRASH. And we began to do abortions in that clinic. I was the director of it. I had 35 doctors working for me, 85 nurses. We functioned from 8 o'clock in the morning till midnight, 7/24, 7 days a week, almost 24 hours a day. In my 2 years at that clinic, we had done 60,000 abortions, no deaths. In 1973, I got overcommitted and exhausted, and I thought, well, I will leave this abortion clinic in the hands of others, which I did. And I took up a job as chief of obstetrics, the obstetrical service at St. Luke's Hospital in New York City, which is a major teaching hospital for Columbia University. And I spent the next 4 years doing clinical research on the fetus. At that point, in 1973, coincidentally, all of the new technology was moving into our field. By new, I mean nothing that's new now, but it was new then: ultrasound imaging, electronic fetal heart monitoring, and we opened a window into the womb. Against my better judgment, we did this, and I began to see the fetus as a human being, a person, a member of our community. We were measuring it. We were looking at it sleeping, dreaming, urinating, swallowing, sucking its thumb, active work by the fetus. We were electronically monitoring its fetal heart, watching it react to we would put a fetal heart monitor on the woman's abdomen, and we would play a Mozart record, and the baby's heart would jump along, and suddenly we'd put Van Halen on, and the baby's heart would go through the roof. So and if we did it 2 or 3 times, we suddenly discovered also that the fetus began to acclimatize itself to that. The 3rd time we put the Van Halen record on, nothing happened. The fetus was learning. So this was an epiphany to me. It took me 4 years of accumulating all of these data and data from other sources for me to finally change my mind. In 1974, I wrote an editorial in the New England Journal of Medicine in which I raised questions, but by 1977, I was firmly pro-life. I was against abortion. I have an inquiring mind, so in 1984, I decided to find out what happens during an abortion. What really happens? I mean, it's really a blind procedure. You don't see what you're doing in an abortion. You put up a suction tip and you turn on the machine and out comes the chopped meat. So I persuaded a friend of mine to put an ultrasound machine on the abdomen of women on whom he was doing abortions that weekend, 30 or 40 of them, and he videotaped them. And we picked out one particular one which was rather clear, and around that we built a film called The Silent Scream. It was really a film of the reaction of the fetus to this impending danger and disaster. 2 years later, I got interested in the situation of what happens during a second trimester abortion. The first one was done at 11 weeks, silent scream. So we put a fetoscope into the uterus of a woman who was 19 and a half weeks pregnant, put a camera on the eyepiece and filmed the abortion from inside the womb, watching the child being torn apart. And we made that into a film called Eclipse of Reason, which won many awards at many film festivals and was ultimately nominated for an Oscar in the documentary division. And finally, in 1993, I got burned out. I suspended my practice, turned it over to another doctor, and decided to go into bioethics full-time. Spent the first year at Georgetown University at what is called the Kennedy Institute of Ethics, not an oxymoron necessarily, and then went to Washington, D.C. is wonderful. It's the only city in which a mayor has ridden to his own inauguration in a limousine, the license plates of which he made. I mean, it's really marvelous. But when Georgetown failed to come up with a graduate degree program suitable for me, I transferred to Vanderbilt to the Center for Research in Clinical Ethics, spent 2.5 years there, finally got my graduate degree with a dissertation, all the rest of it, in 1997, and here I am talking bioethics to you all. Thank you.
We'll now take questions from the audience, and the panelists may wish to interject after you may direct your question to one or to all of the members, and the panelists should feel free to, if they feel very strongly about something, just give me a nod and interject without getting into, too much heavy debate, but stating your point. And I think this was a most impressive presentation. And this question, this young lady, please.
Hi, my name's Courtney, and I'm a student and an activist. This is sort of an odd question, but recently 2 movies have come out in the popular cinema, The Cider House Rules and Dogma, both of which have portrayed abortion providers and abortion clinic workers in a very sensitive light, especially The Cider House Rules, which has been nominated for, I believe, 6 Academy Awards. And this has come as sort of a shock, considering the only movie to deal with abortion before this in the mainstream cinema was Dirty Dancing, with the one scene. So I was just wondering what you all thought of this. Does this point to an acceptance in mainstream culture towards the humanity of abortion providers, particularly with the growing outrage at the murders of doctors? Or is this just a fluke, a one-time movie season where pro-choice activists get a big thumbs up, and then next year we just go back to, watching Titanic? And it's open, anybody can throw in their 2 cents.
I don't know if I can, Bernard, to repeat the question. I couldn't quite do that. I missed some of it because you're too close to that microphone.
Is that better?
Would you do that again, please? Because it was...
Oh, I'm sorry.
For the doctor said he did not hear the question.
Okay.
I don't want to repeat it. You please.
Okay. Is
if
this
you
good?
can just...
Can you hear this?
Step back a bit. There.
Okay.
Because they'll pick you up.
Okay.
The technicians will pick you up.
Okay, great. So I'll shorten the question. Recently, 2 films have come out in the popular cinema, Cider House Rules and Dogma, that have both portrayed abortion providers and abortion clinic workers in a very humanistic and positive light. And I was just wondering if you all thought this was maybe a step towards the acceptance of abortion providers as members of society, productive members of society, and human beings, especially with the growing outrage at the murder of doctors, or if you thought this was just a fluke, that these two movies happened to come out with positive portrayals, but it doesn't signal anything socially.
Thank you very much. And would any one of you care to respond to that?
Well, yes, I can answer that question. In the question of the killing of abortion providers, I have been researching a book on the shootings, and I have interviewed on death row Paul Hill, who killed 2 people down in Pensacola, and Michael Griffin on the other side of the state on death row, who killed Dr. David Gunn in Pensacola also. I've also investigated John Salvi and his rampage and subsequent suicide in jail. I've never talked to James Kopp, who is supposed to have killed Dr. Slepian. But one threnody runs through all of these interviews, and that is that they all resemble so much the rhetoric of John Brown, who was admittedly on the lunatic fringe of the abolitionist movement. But as you know, in 1856, he slaughtered 5 people in Kansas, and in 1859 tried to seize Harper's Ferry, and had his 2 sons killed in that. But the tone of these people whom I interviewed was so reminiscent of what I had read about John Brown that I consigned them to really the lunatic fringe. And a movement as passionate and as combustible and as inflammatory as this one is bound to attract lunatic fringe on both sides.
May I?
Yes, please. You have
We said we'd have an opportunity to respond.
quick? Yes.
First of all, I've debated Reverend Hill for 2 hours prior to his killing these 2 good people. In fact, he's a very wise, intelligent, well-thought-out individual. He's not insane. He truly believes the rhetoric that we are murderers and we're killers. In fact, on that broadcast, which came out of Boston, by the way, he said killing Bill Baird is justifiable homicide. There are many people from the anti-abortion people who have bought into the propaganda that we are murderers and killers. And I wanted to be clear tonight, and one of the reasons I wanted to be with you, that I will no longer tolerate that. I want you to be aware that the nation is building, and I believe heading to a civil war. I lecture all over this nation, and there are many pro-choice people who are arming themselves. I was a keynote speaker for NCAP, which is a national abortion providers group, 200 doctors. Many of them were carrying guns. And they told me because when 200 of them were together, they feared they might be assassinated. There are groups in our movement, that I don't know if you've met yet, Gloria, but have come up to me and said they want to carry guns and asked me to join them to form posses to protect clinics. This has to be stopped by the immediate cessation of the hate speech. We are not murderers. I want that crystal clear. I devoted my life, 40 years, longer than anyone on this panel. I set up the nation's first abortion clinic way back in 1964, way before Bernie even was thinking about it. My whole idea is to help you understand that we are at a turning point of a war, and one of the reasons I wanted to be with you tonight is to maybe let the language sink into the anti-abortion people before we can discuss any compromise or anything. Call off your hound dogs. You cannot sit back and say when we get killed, gee, we deplore the violence that happened to you, but we deplore the violence against the little babies. What you're doing is turning loose the emotionally disturbed people and those who are not disturbed to pick up a gun and say it's okay to see Gloria. You know how angry I am to be here tonight under police guard?
Well,
I was here 30 years ago. We didn't have that.
This is why we're here.
May I address the question?
Yes, please.
Yes.
I think the question was about whether there was, not that these answers haven't been very good and important answers, but I do think that the question was a really interesting one. And I'm actually not familiar with Dogma, but I will now go see it. I have seen Cider House Rules twice and was fairly informed about the process of making it, and I know the difficulties. It took 8 years to make, and it was not easy to get a director. It was not easy to get actors to act in it. None of it was easy, so I hope it wins some of those Oscars. I do think that at least that film is happening now because there has not been as great a threat to a woman's right to choose as there is now since the Roe v. Wade decision in 1973. And so I think that heightened understanding of the threats to choice and the fact that if Roe goes, the legal underpinnings of Griswold versus Connecticut, the underpinnings of Bellotti versus Baird that make it possible for you to get your pack of birth control pills or your condoms will go as well. There is a line in the Cider House Rules that to me was the most touching in the entire film. A woman had come to the orphanage, Dr. Larch, you'll have to see the movie if you don't know all of the context here. Dr. Larch had helped her. She had come with a septic abortion. She died. He had some of the orphans in the orphanage were helping him to dig this woman's grave, and as they were burying her, one of the boys said, "What, Dr. Larch, what did she die of?" And he said, "She died of secrecy." And that's what we can't let happen ever again.
Sharon, do you have any response to the question? Would you care to respond? And if we could, we have many people who are vitally interested. If we could keep the questions to 1 minute and the answers not more than 2, please.
Well, first of all, the last movie I saw was about some little mouse in a car, so I can't respond to the Cider House Rules. I don't ever get to go out anymore. It's just traveling. But I do want to say, in terms of clinic violence, that Feminists for Life put out a reward for the man who bombed the clinic in Alabama. And I have a unique perspective on this issue as former Director of Development for the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill. We see this kind of extreme reaction in the environmental movement, the animal rights movement, the abortion movement, but only in the anti-abortion movement do you see everyone blaming a movement for the actions of one person that is mentally ill. And I think it really speaks volumes about the fact that we really don't understand this as an illness. It is a treatable illness. And we unfortunately have the American Civil Liberties Union and federal governments that have stopped us from putting in hospitals people who are clinically mentally ill. The only way you could replicate schizophrenia that Salvi has is to give somebody PCP for a lifetime. And when you have an illness like that, you have to be treated clinically. And his parents tried to get him help. And the mental health system would not accommodate him. So it's easy to get all excited about this issue. It's harder to do the work to fix it. And we've got to have a commitment to helping these people.
Right here, question, please.
I'd like to direct my question mostly to Gloria Felt, although I would welcome answers from any of the panelists. As you probably know if you've looked at the article which was distributed, Right to Life's position is based primarily on the idea that each human being is a human person and therefore has full human rights, and that making any sort of distinction between a human being and a human person leaves open the door to all sorts of acts of genocide or infanticide, or other heinous acts which we all agree here are completely wrong. To that line, I was looking up a bit of information on Planned Parenthood and found some very disturbing information from Planned Parenthood's founder, Margaret Sanger. And so I'd like to read a short quote and then ask if Gloria Felt would be willing to respond to Planned Parenthood's position on that. Margaret Sanger wrote in 1926 in the Birth Control Review that she was talking about immigration policies in the United States and said, "While we close our gates to the so-called undesirables from other countries, we make no attempt to discourage or cut down the rapid multiplication of the unfit and undesirable at home. In fact, Through our archaic and inhuman laws against birth control, the breeding of defectives and insane becomes a necessity. These types are being multiplied with breakneck rapidity and increasing far out of proportion to the normal and intelligent classes. Obviously, we're all disturbed by this quote, and I'd like to see what Planned Parenthood's current position on that, and if there's any other.
Oh, now, please, I don't want to hear, you can applaud when we're finished. No, please, give a response.
Sure. I think you have to, the first thing I want to say is I actually would like to see exactly where the source of that is, because what I have interestingly found over time is that very often quotes that are attributed to Margaret Sanger were not in fact her quotes, but let me assume for the moment that that one is, and talk about the fact that you have to understand the context of the times. You have to understand that, that Margaret Sanger wasn't perfect, as none of us is, but that Margaret Sanger's entire life was devoted to making birth control legal, accessible, available, and better for all those who needed it. Her goal and the source of her passion was to make sure that every woman could decide for herself. And when you really know the story of Margaret Sanger, what her philosophy was and what her life is, and I would highly recommend that you read a full biography of her, and it has warts and all in it, and it is called Woman of Valor, biography of Margaret Sanger by Ellen Chesler, and it tells you the full story. Planned Parenthood is totally committed to making sure that a woman has the right, the means, and the ability, both legally, morally, and ethically, to make her own reproductive choices free of any kind of pressure, coercion, that she should have the information that she needs, that she should have the access to health care that she needs, and that she should make her own responsible choices.
Question, please.
Sorry. My name is Runa. I'm an undergraduate at the college. I was wondering if the panelists could speak to the reproductive rights movement as both a domestic human rights issue as well as an international human rights issue. My question specifically is, what commonalities lie between the domestic and the international debate? And more specifically, what's unique about the American, quote-unquote, abortion debate?
Could you each of you, whoever wishes to respond, if you could do that in a minute or a minute and a half, please.
I'd like to respond to that, actually. There are great parallels. Feminists for Life continues in the tradition of the early American feminists, and if you want to think about what it's like for women in developing countries today, it is very similar to what was happening in America in the 1850s when Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were working on the abolitionist movement, the suffrage movement, and also working to enact legislation to protect women from coerced abortion, from all abortions they felt it was wrong. Well, at that time, women were having 20 babies, easily. Half of them would die in childbirth, half of them would die, kids wouldn't reach age 5. But they didn't believe that abortion was the answer. And in many developing countries today, you find that Americans have gone and imposed our solutions when they ask for clean water, when they ask for immunizations, when they ask for the ability to own land, they ask for the right to be educated, that we come over and we tell them that we can give you a safe and legal abortion and that will solve all your problems, or that's the linchpin to helping you. And Benazir Bhutto asked us to respect our sisters enough to give them what they ask for instead of imposing our American values on them.
Any further comments?
Yeah, I have a comment. Interestingly, and I'm not trying to be facetious, but one of the most effective means of birth control in developing countries, particularly India and others, is the television set. And this has been shown in studies that in certain communities, if television sets were placed and the people watched television a good deal instead of procreating, that the birth rate went way sharply down. And it's extraordinary. These studies are available for perusing, but it's a simple solution to a very difficult problem.
Bill, do you have a quick comment? Gloria or Bill?
Just a quick comment. Since I fought in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and now year 2000. there's been a marked difference. In the 1960s, we could talk openly and freely about the abortion issue. But then around the late 70s and 80s, the rhetoric started to increase. In fact, dear Bernie, just to remind him, we had a case that was made into a movie called the Nancy Klein case, a woman who was in a coma. If you remember this story, 16 weeks pregnant, and the family contacted me for the abortion, and we said that our doctors would help her. And all of a sudden we got sued by 3 Roman Catholic individuals, leaders of the Right to Life movement, who said that she must go through the pregnancy so they could be appointed guardian of her fetus and guardian of her life. We wound up going to the U.S. Supreme Court before the abortion was allowed to be done. But since that period of time, the rhetoric has increased, and with due respect to Planned Parenthood and others, our side has not stood up to these bullies enough. And one of the things we must do is reclaim the moral ground. When we began, the issue was women's rights. Today, you're hearing talk about fetuses. If we gave a damn about fetuses and babies, we would not rank 20th in the world for infant mortality, nor will we have something like 14 million children hungry tonight. So the issue is really control over a woman's body, and we must let that women have that power back again.
Where are these figures from, Bill?
Out of his hat.
Where are these figures?
Just, Gloria has not responded.
What I think is universal around the world is that women everywhere want to be able to give the best possible life they can give to their children, to their families. And in order to do that, they know that they need to be able to have the number of children they can take good care of. And anytime you simply make birth control and reproductive choice available, women take advantage of it. You don't have to sell it. You don't have to promote it. Women have got brains, they've got hearts, they've got consciences, and that too is universal around the world. They don't need to be told, they can figure it out. In Cairo, 5 years ago, 179 nations of the world agreed that reproductive rights are fundamental human rights. Women should be able to have them, and the United States has very sadly pulled back on its leadership in global family planning, and unfortunately the consequence of that always turns out to be more abortion, more unintended pregnancies, more infant and maternal deaths. And the consensus of 179 nations tells you what's universal. What's different, I'm going to stop. What's different is, in the United States, I think, is that there is something about our political system that allows a small number of very loud people to intimidate the rest of us. Pro-choice people need to speak up and speak out.
Question here, please.
Thank you. My name is Michael Tringe, and I'm a junior at the college. This question is specifically for Mr. Baird and Dr. Nathanson, as having backgrounds in medicine. Through newly emerging genetic discovery and technology, doctors are able to better predict certain levels of an unborn child's disease risk for pregnant mothers. Troy Duster addresses the major problem presented for mothers by this new knowledge in his recently published work, Backdoor to Eugenics. With the technology to locate disease genes in an unborn child, yet without the means to treat these disease genes, pregnant mothers are often presented with minimal information to make a difficult choice before birth, as in the case of such serious genetic conditions as cystic fibrosis. What role would your organization or affiliation play in providing mothers in this situation with accurate information or moral guidance?
Yeah, first let me disabuse you of a notion. I really love Bill Baird, and I honestly do, but he's not an MD. I am the only MD on this panel. I can tell you this, that we have now a level of resolution of ultrasound and other devices in medicine which can pick up so-called defective fetuses at a very early stage. In fact, in England, it is compulsory to have an ultrasound at 18 weeks, and I've been advocating that here. We must treat these so-called defective or deformed children as handicapped people. We do not make a practice of wiping out or destroying the handicapped in our society. Quite the contrary, the Federal Disabilities Act protects such people, and that protection should extend, if it does not already, to the unborn. The second thing is that as far as doing something about these babies who are in utero and found to be in some way defective or malformed, there is on the horizon, and very shortly here, gene therapy. Now, gene therapy's gotten a bad name since Jesse Gelsinger died at the University of Pennsylvania. But as a matter of fact, it is still proceeding on all fronts, and it promises great things, particularly for treatment in utero of defective things. I just came back from a course at Vanderbilt in fetal surgery, and the advances which have been made to correct fetal defects with in utero surgery are staggering. So we do have things on the horizon, here now, and philosophically, which can help us to deal with such problems.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Yeah, if
Bill,
I could
please.
kindly respond to Bernie, with due respect, I never think you heard Bill Baird said he was a physician, although I did direct 3 nonprofit abortion clinics, but I happen to be the only one up here with 3 U.S. Supreme Court victories that gave millions of people their freedom. So with that background, I'd like to continue. To help you also understand the issue of women who have come to me for close to 40 years, I've never had a woman that I can think of who ever talked to me about some sort of fetal abnormality. What she would say is, Bill Baird, I'm pregnant. I want to continue or disrupt this pregnancy based on her set of values, based on her set of circumstances, period, end of story. And it's men like Bernie you have to understand, with all his rhetoric and all his calling for ethics.
That's not directed at any person, you direct it to me.
All right. The point, nevertheless, well, Senator, in due respect, I wish you would have commented then about my not being an MD, because you could have very well have said Bill Baird never said he was an MD. But I didn't hear you say that, Senator.
Well, I say it now. We're not here to fight. We're here to try to deal with one of the toughest issues of the country, and the doctor maybe was wrong making that reference. You certainly, and let's get on with it.
Okay. The point is, I've never had a person ask me about some abnormalities within them, but we do know this much, that women have to be the ones to make this decision. By the way, I gave you these brochures, a lot of you. I'd like you to take a look at it, and Bernie, I can certainly direct it to you, that if you notice the Washington Post...
again, Bill.
The Washington Post in 1968...
Well, you guys really must have a hell of a lot of fun.
We do, I promise you.
Yeah, well, don't do it here.
Okay.
We didn't ask you to come here to do it. Do it in another forum.
1968, though, the Washington Post said it was 3 a.m. before the last patient saw Baird. Nowhere in the United States were pregnant women out in the open coming to a clinic as mine was. So therefore, we had tens of thousands of people we saw. And again, the bottom line has to be women and women alone must be free to make that decision, period.
Question right here, please.
This question is directed towards all the panelists. Although at dinner I was talking with Bill Baird, and he made a good point that we have birth certificates in the U.S. here. We don't have conception certificates. But I was also thinking that it seems that, I don't know when birth certificates were started as a policy in the U.S., but it also seems that it was a long time ago, and it seems more of a matter of practicality than really someone thinking, do we need to have something earlier than this? My overall question to all of you is, do you think that the laws of this nation, especially with a lot of them being made, the Constitution being made in the 1700s, a lot of earlier laws being made that really were made before abortion was on the minds of a lot of people, do you think that the laws are valid, are capable of determining whether or not a fetus has human rights, is a human, especially when you have decisions like Roe versus Wade being based upon constitutional rights that were created in late 1700s?
Could you each respond to that in a minute? I hate to do that, but I'm going to extend the program a bit so that we can, these are questions and you're very concerned students, and I'm going to continue, and I think the panel has always said that they would continue too. So come ahead, and if you could respond in a minute, and we can try to address these questions from these fine students. 1 minute each, or if you want, if you don't.
Start on
Bill?
Well, the idea of personhood is a fascinating one. I think women are people. They're persons. Never in the history of this nation has any state counted a pregnant woman as 2 people. Never have we got the year of the census now. No pregnant woman is counted as two people. We don't have a, as I mentioned earlier, a conception certificate. We have a birth certificate. You're not 9 months old at birth. We have a 14th Amendment that says a citizen is one that is born. So again, all this rhetoric of claiming it is a person makes no sense, because 1/3 of all pregnant women miscarry. I know of no law that you bury a miscarriage as a person. If women smoke excessively and she miscarries, do you charge her with a crime of murder? So again, the bottom line is, let us not be so concerned about the rights of an embryo. Think much more about the rights of that woman.
Let me speak.
I'm going to come
excuse me.
here first, then here, and then maybe.
Have you noticed the guys always try to go first? Have you noticed that, folks?
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Here.
That was a joke. That was, okay.
I said we'd go here, right
Okay,
here.
thank you.
Sexism.
The fact of the matter is that this is an issue of where there are some values in conflict, and different people will come down on different sides of that value conflict. I agree with Bill Baird. I think that when you get to the point where you have to decide who gets to decide, the best law is not to have a law. The best law is to allow women to choose and to make sure they have the supports to be able to make that choice with good information and counseling. And everyone should be very frightened right now. Everyone who values choice should be very frightened right now, because the case of Carhart versus Stenberg that is now before the U.S. Supreme Court will for the first time take up the matter of whether a state can rule more in favor of the fetus than it values the woman.
Sharon, please.
I refuse to choose between women and children. I am so tired of us hearing comments about the fetus not having rights, and it doesn't have a history of having rights. Women, for a long time in this country, didn't have the right to vote, the right to go to college, the right to own property, the right to inherit, the right to keep their own children in the case of divorce. It wasn't until the early American feminists worked to change those things, and at the same time, they worked to make abortion illegal in this country because they knew that the word fetus is Latin for young one or young child, not parasite, alien, or one without rights.
Let me make
Dr.
briefly 2 points. One, you must not confuse the characteristics of a person with the definition of a person. Many people have long lists of qualifications to be a person. I personally couldn't pass them, some of them myself. But the other thing is this, and I want to be very serious. The word person is a very dangerous word. It is an exclusivistic word because implicitly it implies that there are non-persons, such as blacks and Jews and gypsies and homosexuals and all the rest of it, all the people who've been shut out of our society for far too long, non-persons. So that word persons is a loaded word, and you must use it very, very circumspectly.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Robert. I'm a senior at the college. I was wondering if Ms. Felt and Ms. Foster could provide some historical context as to how abortion has been viewed by American feminists historically, and relate that to their present positions.
Well, Saren actually just, I think, made that particular comment, and so let me go ahead and address this. I checked with the biographer of Susan B. Anthony the first time I heard this allegation that the early feminists were anti-abortion. The fact of the matter is that Lynn Scher has looked very deeply into this, has been the best biographer of Susan B. Anthony, and of course had to look at the other early feminists as well in that process. She has unequivocally stated that they basically never talked about abortion. They talked, however, about voluntary motherhood, and they suggested that actually abstinence was the recommended means of assuring voluntary motherhood. And it so happens that at that point in time, many women were finding that they were actually becoming infected with sexually transmitted infections from their husbands. And so it was a completely different era. We have to, again, understand the historical context of anything that you hear. Clearly, they spoke in favor of voluntary motherhood. The value system that they espoused, I am absolutely convinced that if they were among us, walking among us today, they would be standing right here with me, supporting a woman's right to choose.
I would direct people to our website at feministforlife.org to look at the extensive documentation that would challenge what Gloria just said. But if you look at the editorial comments by the Washington Post versus the Washington Times, the New York Post versus the New York Times, you know where the editors stand on a particular issue. And if you have a document, a publication called The Revolution, which was a radical feminist newsletter at the time, and you see abortion characterized as child murder, feticide, or a form of infanticide, you know where they stood. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who organized the first women's convention in Seneca Falls in 1848, said, when you consider that women have been treated as property, it is degrading to women that we should treat our children as property to be disposed of as we see fit. And she characterized abortion as a form of infanticide. So I think they were very clear on this issue.
This young man right here, please.
This is a question for the two pro-life people on the right.
How did we do that?
Oh, we're on the left.
Yeah, I thought we were on the left. We're the feminist group.
Incorrectly, but we're on the left.
Actually, that's kind of what I'm thinking. Both of you are recent converts to the pro-life cause. Well, in so much as you didn't support, you weren't on the same side long ago when it was more about birth control or women's rights in general in the 60s.
No. My first speech in college was against abortion. I don't know. I have not flipped my opinion on this subject. No.
Well, I mean, as in you support other women's rights in general that have been controversial in the past. And what the pro-choice people seem to be worried about most is people who, in organizations who in the past have not supported women's choices like birth control or the right to vote. And do you sympathize with their fear that it's not just about the fetus, it's about women having choices in general?
Let me answer that by saying this. I have heard nothing but, or very little but, freedom of choice here since I got here in Boston a couple of hours ago. And I will tell you that freedom of choice, autonomy, has been raised to a deified level in this country to trump every other ethical principle we have. Where is justice here? Where is beneficence? Where is non-maleficence? Where are the ties to community? Where are the ties to community and family and church and state and everything else? Women or no one else, not just women, but no one should make choices in a moral vacuum. They must be bounded by restraint and by community standards and community ties. We cannot function in a moral and ethical vacuum, making these rampant, wild-eyed choices.
Question.
Well, Senator, may I please respond?
If in a minute,
yeah,
if yes,
1 minute. Well, first of all, when you talk about where's the justice to force a woman to go through a pregnancy against her will? Where's the justice that I saw patients who would take douching bags and fill it with Lysol or bleach or turpentine in desperate efforts to abort? And without saying anything about the good doctor, but in his book, when he talks about birth control, that it leads to some form of perversion, that he's also now, since he switched, not only anti-abortion, but morally is opposed to birth control. And you can't have it both ways. Give women the right to birth control and the right to abortion.
Well, just a minute. We have our two panelists that have an interjection to make. Yes, you may interject, Gloria, and you may interject.
Thank you.
Okay, 1 minute, please. Boy, these two guys love to scrap.
The very notion of morality implies that we must have choice. Without choice, there is no such thing as morality. You have to be able to choose in order to have morality in general, and to imply that women lack the brains, the hearts, and the consciences to be able to make our own responsible, ethical, and moral choices absent strictures that come from the government telling us what to do is simply insane.
Including 14-year-old girls.
Next. Sharon, did you have a 1-minute response?
Yeah, I want to say before this thing gets too out of control that I don't believe that there's any compassionate person who would wish an abortion on a young girl. Nor do I wish that I believe that there's any pro-lifer out there that really wants a teenage girl to drop out of school and end up facing a lifetime of poverty. We see compassion for these women on both sides and in two different ways. We have to get past all the shortcomings of an easy out. Sitting there saying a safe abortion is just going to sit there and help her through her problems. We need to look at what are her real problems. Students in college here, do you see visibly pregnant students on this campus? Do you have daycare? Do you have housing? Do you have maternity coverage in your school health care plan? A lot of colleges don't. If we start going back to the reasons that drive women to abortion, the lack of resources to make a life-affirming choice, that's what drives women into an abortion. And we've got to sit there and look holistically at this situation, because I don't believe we want women to be in these desperate straits.
Question, please.
My question is for Ms. Foster. I'm a choice activist, and I was excited that we had actually a little bit of common down. I agree with you that there should be no forced abortions. I agree with you that there should be no forced adoptions, and I agree with you that women need more choices. As a recent mother, I can tell you that this is not a pregnant woman-friendly campus, and it's also not a baby-friendly campus. I totally agree with you there. But when I think about it, if abortion isn't legal, and pregnancy is no small commitment, and so for a lot of women, adoption would not have been an option. Mm-hmm. If we don't have adoption is an option, and you don't have the option of abortion, then all I see is forced parenthood, and I don't see that any better than forced adoption.
Do you have a question?
Abortion.
No, but I think
I was just wondering
but I would like to react to her. At colleges across the country, Feminists for Life has been reaching out not to just the pro-life students, but to work with pro-choice students to have a pregnancy resources forum that would ask all the people who are responsible in the administration for housing, daycare, maternity coverage, little things like, can you safely change your baby in a bathroom, or is it going to fall off the sink? Do you have to nurse on a toilet? I mean, people don't think about making this world pregnant and parenting friendly. And so I would really ask the pro-life and the pro-choice students, if you want to make a real legacy for the women who follow and the parenting fathers as well, that you take the next step and come together, and I would love to moderate a forum that talks about resources for pregnant and parenting students, and then we can take these lessons out into the working world and say, women in the working world deserve to be at a living wage, they deserve maternity leave. You can't believe the places in this country where you cannot get these basic things, and they say you got a free choice. If you don't have a place to live, if you have no place you can afford for daycare, if you don't have health care that includes maternity coverage, and it's going to cost you $5,000 to $20,000 for a live birth, but $300 for an abortion, what choice do you really have? You're up against the wall. And so I think that by looking holistically at the reasons that women have abortions, by looking to Alan Guttmacher's own research, Planned Parenthood's research arm, they know who is having abortions and why. Listen to women and find solutions.
What if you just don't want to?
Question here, please.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This was for Dr. Nathanson. Are you concerned that if abortion rights are restricted and women don't have legal option for safe abortion, that hospitals will once again be filled with dying and injured women because of illegal abortion practices, and do you consider this acceptable risk?
Who are you directing it to?
Dr. Nathanson.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch most of you, a lot of your
Would
questions.
you step a little closer to the microphone?
Sorry.
We're going to get it right here.
give me
Are
more
you concerned that if abortion rights are restricted and women do not have a legal option for safe abortion, that hospitals will once again be filled with dying and injured women because of illegal abortion practices? And do you consider this acceptable risk for
Yeah.
women?
I understand your question, and let me assure the audience, let me emphasize this. I am not advocating what I am going to say now. I am merely making a prophecy or a prediction. If abortion were criminalized tomorrow morning across the United States, we would first of all never go back to the days of coat hangers. Those days are gone forever. There are many medications now which are available, even approved by the FDA, although not specifically to carry out abortion. These medications will do it. And women who wanted an abortion really badly enough would go to the drugstore or the doctor or someone and buy these pills under the counter and have their abortion. Now, as I said, I'm not advocating this. I'm merely telling you we would never go back to the old days of carnage and desperation.
Under the counter, do you mean illegal, or, I'm sorry?
Pardon?
No.
Okay.
One question. We have others here. Question.
Senator, please.
Yes,
I'd like
1
to
minute.
I'd like to respond to that, since I did work with many, many women when it was illegal, and I disagree vehemently with him. He's forgetting that not all people are sophisticated, not all people know what kind of drugs to get, nor do they have ready access to it. So I do think many of the poor would go back to the concept of a douching bag filled with soap suds, not knowing the body could absorb the fat from the soap, and they would die of a fat embolism. Or people would take a hypertonic solution in a baster, force that into the uterus for the abortion, not being aware by forcing residual air in the baster, they could die of an air embolism. So there's much of the public who are not aware of their own physiology. Many of you in this room may not even be aware of birth control to its nth degree. I'd like to see, before we leave here tonight, that maybe Feminists for Life or others would set up on your campus and across this nation a birth control group on campus where you have ready access to birth control on the campus.
Yeah, well, somebody, well, never mind.
Question, and then we're going to take about 2 more.
Okay, my question is for Ms. Foster. In your earlier statement, you seem to be presenting the idea that feminism and women's rights are not inherently linked to reproductive rights, whether they be birth control or abortion. And I would like to ask you how you think that women can participate in the workforce to the same degree as men and have all the opportunities that we would like them to have if they're not allowed access to reproductive rights.
Well, first of all, I think we need to clarify that Feminists for Life does not have any policy against birth control. So there's a lot of assumptions going on here. Like the early American feminists, individuals within our organization, some of them who only eat at health food stores would refuse to put Norplant into their body or any chemicals. We have others in our group who think that chemicals are wonderful. There's no problem with condoms. We have a spectrum of ideas. People are looking to new technologies over in England where they're using Unipath and other systems where women are sitting there tracking their fertility. There's all sorts of different opinions on this issue. Some are looking at natural family planning, and others are looking at don't believe in contraception. So there's a real spectrum of opinion on this. But in what we believe is, and what we understand to be feminism was based on what Mary Wollstonecraft wrote, the first feminist, A Vindication of the Rights of Women, where she talks about nature and everything deserving respect, and those who violate her laws seldom do so with impunity. And she talked about women casting off the embryo before birth or committing infanticide. And she talked about the fact that it was because women were weaker than they ought to be because they didn't have financial resources, that they weren't independent. And the early American feminists picked up where she left off and hoped that by women gaining independence, by women not having to depend on everybody else for certain things, that they would be able to complete their pregnancy. Ironically, the stronger we get, the less likely we feel like we can do both things. I'm hoping that by looking at the reasons that drive women to abortion, like the early American feminists did, whether it's a lack of financial resources, a lack of emotional support, we can sit there and address this holistically. And it's a basic tenet of feminism, to believe in the rights of all people. This is not womanism, it's not a matriarchy.
1 minute, please, Gloria.
May I share a Margaret Sanger quote that we all know for sure she said? No woman can call herself free until she can own and control her own body. No woman can call herself free until she can decide for herself whether and when she will become a mother.
Question. This question, and then one more from here, and then I'm going to ask the panel to summarize, Bernard and Sharon, 2-minute statement at the end. And we will start in the opposite direction when I finish these next 2 questions. This young lady and then I think selected one of those 3. They're talking. No, you're coming up. And we'll start with this question, then your question will be the final question, and then 2-minute ending, starting with Dr. Nathanson coming this way, and then concluding. Please.
Okay, this is directed towards all of you. What do you think of the current widely held view, supported also by both McCain and Bush, that not only is abortion a choice, but also pregnancy in the first place? This view supports abortion only in the instances where pregnancy resulted from rape or incest, and therefore sex was not a choice. In all other cases, sex is a choice, not a necessity, and pregnancy is a possible consequence. Should we not be prepared to accept the consequences of our actions? The absolute best form of birth control is still abstinence.
Doesn't require an answer.
1 minute each, please.
Well, it's a wonderful statement, but I don't think it requires an answer from my side.
Okay.
I didn't know it was a question.
Yeah, it sounds like a polemic, not a statement.
Do you have any?
Or a question, I mean.
Okay. Any response?
Sure.
Roy and Bill?
Abstinence is the 100% foolproof way to prevent unintended pregnancy. And each one of us is a sexual human being, and each one of us at some time in our life is likely to have a sexual relationship. And let's assume for a moment that that sexual relationship is in marriage. Would you consider that to be appropriate? Let's also then begin to think about the fact that when one is married, it is not unusual for people to engage in sexual relationships with some frequency. Is that not correct? And is there anything wrong with that? And should people have to risk pregnancy every single time? And if someone becomes pregnant and they don't want to be, then have they been irresponsible? I don't think so. I think the choice has to be in existence throughout the spectrum of reproductive issues, period.
Bill?
Yeah. I'm just kind of fascinated. I mentioned to Gloria. It's hard to believe when I was here in the 60s and the 90s to hear how some of you applauded. The nonsense about abstinence is really that it's not a real world. Most of us are sexual. Most of us do engage in intercourse, including many of you clap your hands and say how much you support abstinence when indeed you're having sex, okay?
Sharon, you had a response. 1 minute.
It's just a comment about the issue of rape, because we haven't brought it up tonight. And it's always those hard cases that seem to really, say, well, this is why you're pro-life or pro-choice. And I was at Berkeley recently when we were talking about issues of conception through rape, and this young woman stood up and she sat there and said, my mom told me that when I was conceived through sexual assault. And she looked around at everybody and she said, you know what? I have a right to be here, and I am not an opinion. I am a person. I am the face of choice.
One last comment. It brings up the question of how many of you here are absolutely sure that you were not conceived in an act of rape or forcible sex. I don't think anybody here can say yes or no to that. Well, I got 4 or 5.
Well, Final question right here, please. Question right here.
Hi, my name's Voop, and I'm also an undergraduate of the college. I actually have a question for Sarah Foster, and this actually leads right into what's been talked about right now. As a feminist, how can you be talking about the fact that I understand the child's right, if the child's born in a rape, conceived in a rape, for that child to perhaps have a right to life, but you're a feminist. What about the woman who's been raped and doesn't want to have that image of that rape around their entire life?
That's a very good question. I think that you, like everybody on this issue, comes from a point of view where you sit there and you think first about the woman, and I think that really is important, and that is what we should be doing. I approached the Violence Against Women Task Force, which FFL is the only pro-life member of that task force, sadly, and asked them if we could sit there and look at the issue of violence and rape. We all talk about it, but what are we doing about it? And the Violence Against Women Task Force, of course, is working to prevent rape in the first place. That's the most important thing. The second thing is there's never been a study of the needs of women who have been raped in terms of what are her psychiatric needs or psychological needs, what does she need for her child if he or she is born, what kind of help would they need adjusting if they heard that they were conceived through rape. But let me say that from speaking to the women that I know who have been raped, one of them was a student at a college in Michigan. She said, you know, I was 14 years old when I was sexually assaulted by my third cousin. So it's not just rape, it's incest. And my parents hid the pregnancy from everybody around because we didn't want this guy coming back and saying that he had a right to stop an adoption. And they adopted, the baby boy was adopted to a gay couple. She sees him every year. She said, I would never perpetuate what happened to me to my own child. It's not just his product. It's not a product of conception. It's a part of me, and she loves this kid desperately. Another woman who had met her mom after she had been 21 years old, she was placed for adoption, was reunited, and she asked her mom, you know, she looked at her and she said, you know, maybe, when she found out she was raped, conceived through rape, maybe it would have been better if I was never born at all. And she looked at her daughter, Julie Macama, and said, you were the only good thing that came out of a rape, but I never would have known it at the beginning.
If I may,
No. I'm going to give you each 2 minutes now, but I want to commend this audience. I'm very proud of you. You did a splendid job, just as I expected. Thank you very, very much. I'm proud of you, very proud. Now, Doctor, 2 minutes, and each of you have 2 minutes to conclude it with any remarks that you wish, and then a few closing remarks of my own. Thank you. Doctor, 2 minutes.
Yeah, we have the power technologically to solve this problem, to bring us all together. We do have the technology now to locate the early embryo. We have the technology to freeze it. This has been done in animal work. Then take the block, the frozen block, out of the womb of the woman who does not want the pregnancy and put it into the womb of a woman who wants the pregnancy. Intrauterine adoption. It is an idea which I first proposed back in 1979 in my first book, and I was amused to find that Lawrence Tribe in his book about 5 years ago proposed the same thing. I don't know whether he read my proposal or not. I assume he did, but nevertheless. That is the technological solution. But more than that, abortion and its offspring is a social problem. And it really should be solved by social means, not medical means. We should not be having doctors become social engineers. But if we must solve the problem, that is the technology on which to do it.
Thank you.
When I became first executive director and then president of Feminists for Life, everybody in the pro-life movement and the women's movement were telling us where we needed to be and what was important for us to do and where we could make a difference. And we found that the most important place was on college campuses. 1 out of 5 abortions are performed on a college woman. And we began a program based on a story by a board member who became unexpectedly pregnant at American University and looked around her campus and found there was housing for the basketball players that was being built, but there was no place for her and her baby to live. There was no daycare that she could afford. It was $6,000 or $7,000 a year. There was no maternity coverage that would take care of her expenses. And so we approached pro-choice clinic staff, an abortion doctor, pro-choice healing therapists, as well as pro-life students, pro-choice women on the tenure track who found that they couldn't achieve tenure if they were pregnant while they were working towards tenure in college. And when we completed this program and found all across the country that young women on both sides of the debate were coming together for once to really look at solutions and not scream at one another, we were really stunned that Planned Parenthood's Clinic Defense and Research Team, the Insider, put out a newsletter that attacked our program, that lied about me talking about in religious terms, which was not true, and I still have a tape of that speech. It actually implored women on the pro-life side to reach out to women on the pro-choice side and work together for solutions. And they told their staff that they should report my activities and my whereabouts. Well, it's posted on the website, so anybody can look. I'm inviting Gloria, because I don't think she was aware of this, to look at our program and to be a partner with us, because we won't get anywhere by arguing with each other constantly. And I think Bill Baird is right on this. We need to look at common ground, and for us to sit there, this is one of the areas, along with welfare reform, child support issues, and violence against women, that we could really work together. It would be another great place for us to sit there, and we're not going to agree about abortion, but I think that Planned Parenthood would agree with us that women should have the rest of the choices. And it takes resources to give them that.
All right.
The topic of this panel was, can there be common ground? I'd like to ask the question a slightly different way, because I agree with Saren that I don't necessarily know that we even need to try to find the common philosophical ground, but I definitely think there is common cause that can be made, and that common cause that I would invite anyone who is opposed to abortion to join with Planned Parenthood to provide is family planning, birth control, responsible sex education, support our efforts to get insurance plans to cover contraception when they cover other prescription drugs, support our efforts to make sure that women, regardless of their income, can get access to family planning services through Title X and Medicaid and other health care services, make sure that schools provide young people with honest, medically accurate sexuality education so that they can grow up and make healthy and safe decisions, because ultimately it's that common cause that can help to reduce the need for abortion. And we must remember that when a woman is faced with an unintended pregnancy, there is not one of us here, not a single one of us, who has the right to judge.
Bill Baird, please.
Well, I thank you for the opportunity of being with you and for you to watch, quote, a convicted felon at work. But I hope you realize I'm a fighter. I've seen too much suffering, and what I heard here tonight, you've scared me to death. You pro-choicers better get off your britches and recognize the fight you've got, which I've been warning you a long time ago. You've got young people out here who are absolutely believing fertilized eggs are people. And you've got to be, I think, somewhere in outer space to truly believe that. But my bottom thought is this. What Gloria says is quite correct about birth control. I'd like to ask you who are pro-choicers, where would you be tonight if it wasn't for Baird v. Eisenstadt? Think about the power of that statement, that someone 30 years ago had to sit in a cage for your freedom. And there are those who want to bring it back to those days, and you've got to hear that. 2 to 4 U.S. Supreme Court judges are to be appointed by the new president, whoever he may be. If that's Bush, you can count on your rights going right out the window. So pay attention to the politics of what's happening, but most of all, pay attention to your dignity, your freedom. How dare anybody here tell you what to do with your body, whether it be a right to life or a church or a male legislator? If I had one dream before I end tonight, one dream, starting with the Pope, maybe Bernie and a few others, let all these men have one queen-size menstrual cramp. You watch what converts they'd become overnight.
Please, this is really unacceptable.
Well,
American.
well, now, if I might conclude here, I think you can see the heat and the light and sense the passion and the honest depth of feeling of the members of this panel. That's quite obvious. I think all of us may agree, and Lord knows I wouldn't even try to get anything semblance of that out of this, but that we might agree that violence is not the answer. I think all concur. That's a start. And it was, for me as a politician, one of the most difficult things I ever dealt with. And I come away with this, that abortion is a deeply intimate and personal decision. And we should respect each other's moral, ethical, and theological reasons that ground them so strongly in their views, whatever they are. That's all I'm saying. But I would like to offer a special thanks to Melissa Michella. Where are you? She was here. And to Shauna Shames and Chris Kirchhoff right here. These three did a beautiful job. I think Chris has been working on this since November. The two young women did the piece in the Crimson this morning. I commend them and thank them for their leadership in organizing tonight's event. It was powerful, provocative, and just what I hoped we could have. And thank you to Bill White and all the fine crew there, to Rhonda and Nora and Noel and Kathy for having the courage to put this together and making it work. And thanks especially to this audience and the Harvard Political Union. One of the Institute of Politics committees will be holding a post-forum discussion for undergraduates only in the first floor conference room. Anyone that may wish to go there. It's late, I know, but that's through these doors at the rear of the forum. Following the forum, any interested undergraduate may wish to discuss the issues of the forum is invited to attend that. And I thank you so much, and perhaps that we will envision a time when the title was, Can We Ever Find Common Ground? And my hope and prayer, and I know yours, is that we'll reach common ground, and people like this will bring the matter fully to our attention in the most vivid way. And thank you very much for your courtesy.